We are talking about resilience. We are shaping this podcast as we go, and it feels important also to somehow respond to events in the outside world. So this week we are talking resilience. It's been a tough week for the Jewish community in the UK. Our community in Israel is enduring nightly, sometimes hourly missile strikes, and we are talking resilience. A part of the experience right now of Jewish community here is about a real sense of isolation. And I think that does have a real impact on our capacity to endure. There are people in the NHS, there are people in therapy settings, there are people in universities, in all sorts of professions up and down the country. And people speak of a real sense that once upon a time they felt very, very at home in UK community, as if almost without any boundaries between themselves and the people they worked with, whatever religion, faith, nationality they came from. And now I think particularly since October 7th, and probably even more ramped up now to a degree or another with the war with Iran, there is a great kind of differential that's opened up between many people who identify strongly with the Jewish community and many people who have friends, relatives, cousins in Israel who feel like they are ostracized.
Welcome to Really Jewish. Welcome to our conversation about what it is to be Jewish. Hi, Oliver.
Hi.
If you are back for another listen, welcome back. If you are here for the first time, Shalom, Bruchim Habayim. We are delighted to have you. The Really Jewish Project is one where we think about big topics that shape the Jewish world, but also is a personal examination of who we are and how we are personally affected by how we live out our Jewish life. I am Yair Eldan. I'm a law professor in Israel. With me is Oliver Joseph. I am secular. Oliver is a rabbi in the UK and obviously religious. Oliver.
Welcome. This week we're back for leg number 5. I've got a bit of a cold, so my voice is a bit deeper. We are talking about resilience. We are shaping this podcast as we go, and it feels important also to somehow respond to events in the outside world. So this week we are talking resilience. It's been a tough week for the Jewish community in the UK. Our community in Israel is enduring nightly, sometimes hourly missile strikes, and we are talking resilience. Yair, tell me a little bit how you sit on this topic of resilience today.
I think the most important distinction I can have from my experience in life, we are old enough, we saw some things, we were affected by suffering and of our dear ones, of ourselves, losses. I think the most important distinction I can have is between resilience and endurance. For me, resilience is something deeper, something that is, in a way, if I'm talking to a religious guy, more religious. If there is a God, for me, I think he would aim to resilience, meaning coping with suffering in life in a self-aware way, with self-consciousness, with understanding, with having a perspective about life. While endurance is more superficial, it's getting hit by life and continuing. So there's something more, I don't know, basic about endurance and something more deep about resilience for me. And when I think about my past dark times, dark times in the army, dark times after my divorce, dark times after seeing close relatives suffer from illnesses, I think that I couldn't go through it without going into it, right? So I didn't endure it. Endurance, of course, you have to go through it, but I think what enabled me to come from the ashes was the feeling that I looked into it. I understood that my suffering is connected to other suffering. I had a perspective suddenly. I went into it first, for the first few days, maybe months, a little bit, but then I went out and I had a perspective, and that's what gave me the feeling of endurance. How is it for you, Oliver, as a religious person?
I relate to the distinction. I want to also, talk a little bit personally about these times. I think my sense of endurance is day to day, that we get through the day. I think one of the sayings that I live by is one of the ones that came from my late mum of blessed memory, who would always say, go to bed, you'll feel better in the morning. And it was. I say it to friends and people who I support in the community now. Sometimes the best you can do is just to put your head down on a pillow and go to sleep. And there's something about just getting to the end of the day, which is, an achievement. I struggle with that sometimes as well because, when the kids are really having a tough day and when the kids have a tough day, we have a tough day. And you just want to get to the end of the day, that feels sad. Like there's a pain there that the best thing you can do is to survive till it gets dark. But I relate to that's endurance. Resilience, I think you're right, is something greater. I relate to, in the context of this conversation, resilience for me is about somehow relating my own personal experience to a much broader experience of peoplehood, of community, of those in the past who have lived through the same and much worse, let's say. And it's through that strength, and not even through that strength, just through that sense that my experience is greater than my own personal experience, that I'm able to come out the other side and make meaning of that experience. And also to hold in community, to do that at a community level also feels like some kind of support and some kind of resilience.
I had one comment in one picture in my head when you spoke, which is the fact that in Israel, after like a suicide bomber is exploding in the middle of a city, after an hour or two, you can see in Israel the street is going back to normal. And there's something crazy about it, but it's also, reflect a sense of livelihood, of endurance in a very deep way. I mean, going back to reality. And everybody who visits here in Israel from abroad says that there is something about this country that is full of life. And I thought about it because for me, this exact feeling and the fact that it's connected to community, as you said, for me, it's connected to a more superficial. I mean, I connected to a more superficial dealing with reality. I'm not judgmental, but I'm saying if you want to be resilient, we're talking about a deeper process. Leaning on community is great. And there are, researchers in Israel after October 7th that say that leaning on community is one of the factors that kept people from not being depressed. And people who didn't have a community to rely on got into a depression.
So, there's like all of these pictures at the moment of, for those who dwell on social media, which I do a little bit, of like, for example, there was a missile strike in Tel Aviv yesterday, I believe, and next to the missile strike where it struck is a queue for coffee, kind of a couple of hours later.
You're right.
Anybody who has ever visited Tel Aviv knows about Tel Aviv's relationship with good coffee. I also like people in bomb shelters making kind of like stupid videos and funny videos, and Eretz Nederet, one of the kind of staples of Israeli society, the Friday Night Live of Israel, really ramping up comedy and like comedy sessions at this time in relation to the Houthis and the Iranians and making fun of everybody, especially the Israelis. But there seems to be I think something of that positioning does feed into our capacity to be resilient. I understand what you're saying, that it has to be a personal journey. And it is by its very nature a personal journey, the journey towards resilience. But I also want to say that context matters. And when we have people around us, I know from my own personal experience as a rabbi that a part, to jumping around, like a part of the experience right now of Jewish community here is about a real sense of isolation. And I think that does have a real impact on our capacity to endure. I can't speak for everybody because my work is not with everybody. My work is with, a very bespoke corners of the community. There are people in the NHS, there are people in therapy settings, there are people in universities, in, all sorts of professions up and down the country. And mostly my work is in the southeast of the UK, in London and the areas around it. And people speak of a real sense that once upon a time they felt very, very at home in UK community, as if almost without any boundaries between themselves and the people they worked with, whatever religion, faith, nationality they came from. And now I think particularly since October 7th, and probably even more ramped up now to a degree or another with the war with Iran, there is a great kind of differential that's opened up between many people who identify strongly with the Jewish community and many people who have friends, relatives, cousins in Israel who feel like they are ostracized. And each individual reason of why that is and why that's exposed is different, but the thread is common. And I think within that context, people's capacity to endure is reduced because your sense of belonging has been uprooted. Now, some people have made up for that by buying back into the Jewish community in a stronger way. But for some people, that journey has become very lonely. And we'd love to hear from you if you're listening along and you're one of those people who or feels more lonely at the time or feels less lonely at the time. That's an interesting kind of feedback that we'd love to hear from you at home. Yair, what's your take? I'd also, Yair, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your personal experience right now, kind of yom-yomi, day-to-day of what it is to live in Israel right now, because we both have our own specific personal experience historically, which I think should come into this conversation. But also we're talking about this now in terms of how each of our communities, specifically Jewish communities, are enduring at the moment.
I mean, I think the sense of control and being able to control the situation is very connected to endurance. I mean, when you are ostracized or getting anti-Semitic comments and feeling ostracized, obviously you feel that you don't control reality and you're left for the mercy of others. And that's a very disturbing feeling. And actually, when you think about it, State of Israel was supposed to actually give this sense of control to Jews, right? And everybody is joking about the fact that Israel is now the unsafe place for Jews in the world. But I disagree in a very deep way, because in terms of control, it's true that there is something very unsafe about this situation. And to be honest, there are nights here in Jerusalem where we stand in the entrance of our apartment with our 3 kids and we hear the missiles above us and we're scared and we feel a total loss of control when you think about it. It could hit you and you have nothing to do about it. And the management, I'm just putting brackets, Oliver. The risk management here is fascinating, and it's actually, in a way, sad and funny, because there was a time that we decided not to go and sleep in the shelter with our kids because it's too much. But suddenly there were more alarms at night. So you actually manage the risks and you say, listen, during the day I will go down to the shelter, but during the night we will stay in a covered place in our apartment, which is crazy when you think about it. But that's what we do. That's what we actually do. There is a kind of endurance when you think about this, risk management. But to conclude, I just want to say, for me, the State of Israel gives a sense of control. I'm controlling. The army is mine. The country is mine. So I have a sense of control. I'm scared. I'm not safe. But still, I have this. And I think it's very important for endurance as community. But for resilience, for me, it's all about this very intimate, self-individualistic process inside you. That makes you stronger, it's not about physical strength, it's about understanding your place, in history and in society.
So maybe the chidush, like the new learning for me, is that in your perspective that we have to have a sense of spiritual emotional comfort that comes from the outside in order to then go on to the personal exfoliation, the personal process to permit that aspect of endurance. I think about that this is historic now, like we are two and a half years past October 7th, but I think from a European perspective, and I'm in the UK and I work with lots of European students across Europe, so I have that voice in my head as well. I think when the security situation was upended on October 7th and Israel was attacked and thousands of people were killed, including at Nova, a festival which I didn't personally visit, but I went to a very similar desert festival, as I'm sure you have as well in your own life. The imagination of being exposed in that way in the middle of the very flat, very desolate desert is just unthinkable. I think if we're talking about resilience, and the first step towards resilience, perhaps before you get to the aspect of resilience, is creating a sense of safety, as many people have said over the last couple of years, we're still on October 8th. I don't know how you relate to that kind of version of reality, but the sense of security that the State of Israel has created, both for Israelis inside the State of Israel, but also for Jews across the world, is somehow that we have a place that's safe. But I also think that in the broader sense, in the family of nations, those people who live in Hungary or France or Germany or the UK or any other place across Europe also have some kind of sense of protection inside the countries they live in, let's say in a European context. I think that's somewhat evaporated, certainly in the UK and I think in many parts of Europe in recent times. That's not to say that many of us don't have strong feelings about what's going on in Israel, the rights and the wrongs and the correctness of war response to October 7th, all of the above. There is a myriad version of what it is to be in relationship with Israel and the Jewish people. But the sense of protection, this week, 4 ambulances were blown up outside a synagogue very close to my house in London. And in a European context, every other week at the moment, there's some near miss or some very gruesome attack that's happening in Amsterdam, in London, in other parts of Europe. Our sense of security is eroded. And then our capacity to be resilient at that time, if that's an internal journey, is somehow made more difficult because we are dealing with the very immediate response and endurance, if we accept your classification.
I can understand that. I mean, I imagine that feeling that sense of insecurity, of controlling the situation could affect you, every aspect of your life. And when I go back to October 7th and the month afterwards, thinking about resilience, if you are resilient, you have to actually understand what happened to you in October 7th. You have to understand, you have to feel the defeat in a very deep way. Right. And if you don't feel it, you can't, you're not there. If you're not there, you're not resilient. If you're not resilient, i.e., you can't actually correct things and, make things back into their order and take responsibility. I mean, so the aspects of self-awareness, self-consciousness, and I said, for me, that's what religion is all about. For me, if I expect people who are religious to be more self-aware, more self-conscious about what's going on. And actually, when I see what's going on in Israel these days, where religious people are actually doing the opposite. They don't accept any of the consequences, but and they don't reflect on history. They are just in this vengeance journey. And that's, for me, that's very disappointing, I have to admit. But I'm saying that resilience is connected to, a lot of other personal processes that we go through.
So I'm going to introduce a couple of texts to throw into the mix. I have lots of questions about this aspect of resilience. The terminology that I might turn to is like, what are the secrets of Jewish survival? Like, how have we got to today? I read an interesting article written by Daniel Schwartz from George Washington University, and he's talking about Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, who wrote a book called Zachor, that's well read on the Jewish bookshelf, and he's talking about exile from Spain in 1492, where thousands upon thousands of Jews were thrown out of Spain in the medieval period, and many of them were killed, many of them got on boats, many of them stayed secret Jews inside Spain and Portugal. And the book that he's analysing is by Solomon Ibn Verga, who apparently spoke to some of these exiles. And these exiles are on a boat, and a plague breaks out, and they get off the boat onto an island. And there's this interesting passage, which really could be taken from anywhere. I'll just read it out loud briefly. Lord of the universe, although you are doing much to make me abandon my religion, I know for certain that despite the heavenly hosts, a Jew I am, a Jew I will remain, and nothing you have brought or will yet bring upon me will help you. It's like this man who's on a desert island with some kind of lurgy. His wife has died, his 2 sons have died. Like, he's in this moment of exceptional spiritual agony, and he's almost challenging God here to say, I'm going to remain Jewish. It feels appropriate here because we're in the festival of Passover coming up, next week. Yeah. we're in the festival of our own Jewish identity, kind of Jewish identity framing, where we become the people who endure slavery, endure exile across the sea, endure the deserts, and somehow come out the other side. And this text speaks to these moments of spiritual agony, which I have to say that before October 7th, I don't think I understood in quite the same way in a personal context. We've been through a lot in our family in terms of bereavement, in terms of grief, and in terms of a lot of sadness. But there's something about that existential doubt and the sense of, will I survive? Will we survive? That only came into focus in my life, age 40, whatever, 40, 41, after October 7th. This notion that my own journey connects with all of these other people who have come through a significant and profound hardship. And I do think that somewhere in there, some of these stories of spiritual resilience and spiritual questioning that come from different layers of our tradition have helped me. And having known those traditions even before October 7th, that also helped me in a retrospective way, that I'd learned some of this material. And I was like, oh, now this makes sense what it is to be an angsty people. What do you make of this first text?
Listen, I tried not to refer to the words of this person who lost his family, and to interpret them as simple faith. I try not to. And I read them in a way, there's something about our Jewish culture, I would say, Jewish civilization, that is all about, resistance. And for me, resistance is about, connected to what kept us as Jews, connected to critical thinking. To be critical thinking, not to accept authority in a simple way, to question, to analyze, to think about life, about laws, about norms, So I read his resistance as something very Jewish. Having said that, I'm just saying critical thinking and resilience are not the same. For me, critical thinking is the intellectual aspect of what kept us as Jews, and resilience is something different. It's more connected to. I accept every religious person, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, any religious person to aim towards resilience, to be resilient in terms of this self-awareness. There's an emotional aspect in resilience that doesn't exist in the critical thinking aspect, which is more Jewish in my view.
But how do you need to explain what you mean by critical thinking in this context? Why are you bringing the question of critical thinking into this conversation?
Because, first of all, for me, critical thinking, that is one of the features of Jewish life, and one of the things that, I think, preserved Jewish life, because there is kind of being outside reality, looking at reality, analyzing reality, asking questions about reality, about every aspect of it. And you introduced the text of this Jew who is, in a way, resisting God by saying he will continue to be Jewish. He will stay Jewish. For me, there is no meaning of that. I'm Jewish because I was just born Jewish, and that's it. I had no question about it. And that's my, the software in a way, or not software, it's my hardware in a way. It's my hardware.
But there's a way here, as you described it, by putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is me and this is who I will continue to be. And whatever you do, if you,
Exactly.
I will be. And that is, for me, that's the beginning of resilience. For me, that's the perhaps the opening stance, is that sense of, we say in the Torah, am kashe oref, like the stiff-willed people or the stiff-necked people. That's written into our DNA, and some of our original stories of travail and travel in the desert, that we are a stiff-necked people, stubborn as they come. There's something there about the very essence of Jewish identity, which is stubbornness. I'm this guy on the desert island who's lost everything. I'm going to find the one thing that I can control, that I can stick to, and hold on to that. It's the opposite of the people who have lost everything.
I just want to differentiate.
Go on.
Sorry. I want to differentiate it, and just to say that I find the Siduk Adin as a secular person find it, saying Baruch Dayan Haemet, praising God after someone dies.
So translate that for us. Baruch Dayan Emet.
Baruch Dayan
Blessed.
Haemet, the God who has actually is doing a truthful judgment, right?
Yeah.
Saying that God is right in all his, and righteous and right in all his ways, including my relative dying. And I have to admit, as a secular person, I feel terrible when I hear it, and I hate these sayings after a person is dead, or in light of suffering. I hate these religious speaking about the next world as if they know something about it in a very, I having faith in the world that is after our world is fine. Of course, everybody has his own faith, but talking about it in a very positive way, very religious, as if it's a fact. That's a direction that I hate that religion took, in Judaism specifically.
Yeah. So the practice you're talking about, just for listeners who might not be accustomed to it, when somebody dies or when you hear bad news, you say a bracha, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Baruch Dayan Emet, that you say, blessed is God, ruler of the universe, which is the regular clause for a blessing. And then afterwards you say, Dayan Haemet, the one, the judge, the true judge, the true judge. So I relate to that, but then my perspective is clearly inverse, because there's nothing wrong with having a sense that the way to respond to desperation is to find comfort. The Dayan Haemet is somehow returning from our own sense of desperation to a version that is, there's a God in the world, that God is much greater than anything we could possibly ever understand, that God in essence is a God of all the generations, of all time, of all people, and that we return ourselves to that. And that's ultimately my understanding of the mourning process. When we say Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, Yitkadal v'Kadash, God is to be made great and to be made holy. We're returning ourselves from a sense of desperation to a sense of connection. And I can agree, I might disagree on that fundamental point, but I can agree in a frustration that if anybody would ever rationalize any death, and certainly tragic death, that's for me, we can agree on that progressive stance. My understanding of God is a God who is the God that we turn to, is the essence of everything that's unknown. The God that we turn to a God, Baruch Ata Adonai, that God is the unknown. And somehow by returning to that aspect of not knowing, that's the comfort. And I think sometimes in more fundamentalist circles, the version is, no, it's fine because they're going to a better place. And I think that's clumsy, because I don't think any of the attempts to understand what happens to us after we die are by their very nature attempts, and not supposed to be people who've been there and come back or understand anything of what actually happens to us.
Thank you, Oliver. It's interesting to hear your view on God. It's not the first time you talk about it, but I start to understand fully your point of view. But I think, in a way, the version of the blessings, the literally version of the blessings, pointing to God as if He is present. It's a present version of Hebrew, is actually proving my point when you think about it, because there's a lot of effort 2,000 years ago to make God present in our lives, in Jewish life, and when you bless, in the blessing, in the prayer. So you have God during the day. You actually try. He's not there. You can't reach Him, but you make Him a deep effort to actually make Him present in your life. What does that mean? It means that you understand in a very deep way that God is not present. But today, I think there is something crazy about the fact that religious people talk about God as an imminent, as an ontological fact, as something that is in the world. I think that's a diversion of what happened 2,000 years ago. And in a way, as a secular person, whatever works for a person dealing with this crazy reality, crazy world, and uncertainty. But I think I have this degrees of coping, or I do have a scale of coping. There is very superficial coping, very simple coping, and there are attitudes of coping that are in a higher level. That's what I'm aiming to. And resilience is one of them.
Right. So we talk in like the psychologist Maslow's hierarchy, that you have the basic level of need, of human need, and then at the top of the pyramid is spirituality or spiritual connection. And there's something here about where we've got to on the question of resilience, which is that it's higher level. You have to have taken care of some of your more basic needs in an endurance setting in order to get to the aspect of resilience, which I think is interesting. I wanna turn to one last piece of text, Gemara, because it bothered us both. An extract from Makot, which is from the Babylonian Talmud, also about 2,000 years ago. And it's about some rabbis, Liat HaRegel. They're going up to Jerusalem, but they're going not to Jerusalem to the temple, but to the ruins of the temple. And they arrive in the temple, and they see its ruins, see its broken into pieces, and they see a fox emerge from the Holy of Holies. So if you can picture the temple, it has an outer wall, it has an inner wall, and then at the very, very center of the temple is the Holy of Holies, where historically the high priest would go in, I think, once a year only to offer sacrifices. He was only allowed there once a year, and they would tie a cord to his leg to drag him out, lest the power of the Holy of Holies be so strong that he would be pulled out. I actually learnt some temple ritual with Yair back in our Talmud class more than 10 years ago. This special and holy place, there's a fox running around in it. And all of the rabbis that are with Rabbi Akiva cry, they're weeping, and Rabbi Akiva laughs. Akiva mitzachek, it's an interesting kind of loaded terminology of schok, which come back from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, specifically Sarah's laughing before she gives birth to Isaac. I just find it fascinating that you can have like such travesty, such tragedy, and laughing. Rabbi Akiva, like one of the core rabbis of the Talmudic tradition, laughing. And it speaks very much to something of Jewish life. I don't know in this context whether it's actually resilience, but certainly this text has brought us along the journey of resilience in relation to an understanding that sometimes in our greatest tragedy, one of the core parts is to learn how to laugh and to see kind of, I think you said this before we came on, like the broad expanse that then allows us perhaps to see both a glimmer of hope and a glimmer of humor even in the ruins of the temple. How do you read this, Yair?
I wonder, why do you think he laughs? Because I understood this laughing, I'm not sure. You can say he's laughing because everybody, the commentary says he's laughing. Why? Because he says, because if the prophecy of destruction was actually fulfilled, so we have to understand that also the prophecy of construction and
rebuilding
will be fulfilled as well. So he's laughing. Humor is great, and it appears a lot in Israel, as you said. But also, in humor, and I'm concluding. My kids say "chofer," I'm digging into your mind. But I'm sorry. I will say that one last time. Humor could be superficial as well, which is great, and you laugh, and it's great for the moment, and it's wonderful. But humor could be also very deep, and to tell you something about reality and about life. And so I'm not sure about what Rabbi Akiva is doing here. Is it superficial or more deep? And it seems to me that you feel it's very deep because he turns to a broader perspective. That's what you're saying?
I think so. Listen, the rabbis always want to make the text more frum, so that's a good read. That he's laughing because he doesn't just see the destruction, but he sees the ultimate rebuilding of Jerusalem, which is, the fableized kind of version of when the Messiah comes in the Jewish imagination, the temple will be rebuilt. So he looks forward 2,000 plus years and says, one day this will be the temple again. I think my more real version is sometimes all we can do is laugh. Like the more human reaction is sometimes all we can do is laugh. This would have been a moment of profound anguish and strife for a people that had exactly revolved their whole life and existence around temple. And here they see the temple desecrated and in ruin. I think I can hold that this might be endurance, that moment of laughing. But I think it's the stories, because this is text ultimately. We're reading this as text. It's the stories which permit us to find those aspects of resilience in order to get through. You know, when people are making, you know, videos in bomb shelters at the moment, and you know, a lot of very silly, frivolous kind of humor that goes around on WhatsApp groups and in the Jewish community at this time, I think that tells us we can do it, tells us we can endure, and tells us we can get through the other side, and tells us not to take even the toughest parts of our own life too seriously. Share a final word on where this leaves you.
I have this not connected thought, but I will conclude with it. I mean, I can see that we talked about humor. I don't know if you know Shachar Cohen. Shachar Cohen is a comedian. He has these short videos in Instagram about Israel. I mean, he has all sorts of Israeli characters. And I think that's, you know, it's hilarious and it's great. This kind of humor is, you know, giving you a mirror of who you are, and it's very funny. But there's another kind of humor which is very, deeper in a way, more subversive, which I referred to before. That's it. That's what my thought.
Okay. So I think for me, listen, this topic feels tremendously important because I think at this time there are lots of hearts that are breaking. And that's on a very small level. You know, I said I was ill yesterday. We were talking about being men in particular, like our whole worlds fall apart when we're not feeling good. And I have to come through the other side of that. But on the other side, you know, there have been lots of lives lost during this time and lives also broken apart. And there is something here that we have as a Jewish community, a secret potion. I don't think it's that secret because we're, you know, on a podcast talking about it in a very transparent way. But there's a potion, there's a recipe for resilience. And I think sometimes in the context of Judaism and Jewish life, sometimes it serves us to dig down and say, what is that resilience? Where does it come from? How do we find it? And to refresh it and to rejuvenate it and to use it, because it's, you know, as the Gemara reports, people have been using this magic recipe for lots of generations to try and find how to come out the other side and carry on. Thank you for doing this today. As always, lovely to learn together. I wanted to just offer a couple of words from our feedback in. We'd love to hear from you if you have stuff to say about this podcast. Each week, we're trying to read out a couple of responses to our podcast from people who've been listening along. It helps us to improve our podcast. And it's just lovely to have a bit more of an interactive sense to how we produce this podcast. My cousin Constance is in London. She absolutely loved the first couple of episodes, integrating Jewish texts in an open and non-judgmental discussion. It makes Jewish learning and reflection feel very accessible, which is great. And she also loved the images of the first podcast, I think, which was talking about barzel ba-barzel, the steel on steel sharpening one another. I think hopefully we're trying to do that Ear and I together. So thank you, Constance in London. In DC, one of my Hartman colleagues who we studied together with at the Hartman Institute, Julie Resmavik-Tonti, said she loved the latest podcast and was really excited about the vulnerability that we were prepared to share on the podcast. And she loved the machloket, the disagreement between Yair and I. So we're getting better by way of your feedback, so send more into our feedbacking slot. There's on my links, you can find ways of being in contact. That gives me time to say thank you to Oy Vavoy for our new musical intro and outro. You can listen to their single Back to My Roots, available at all streaming platforms. We're going to try and announce their gigs coming up also on here. Please send this podcast to somebody else, like our clips on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and send this to a friend and offer us 5 stars in the place that you listen to our podcast. Finally, we are supporting this podcast on Patreon. So if you wanted to support and make a monthly donation to the production of this podcast, you are very welcome. Thank you for listening to Really Jewish with Yair Eldan and Oliver Joseph. Speak to you, see you next week. Only good.